I feel like for me, my dharma is to remind people how awesome they are and how they have this big light in front of them, it's inside of them. And I think we just forget that it's there, and we just, need someone to really point us back in that direction. Everyone is so special and everyone is so worthy and everyone deserves to be here. And I think sometimes they just need that little tap on the shoulder to be like, oh yeah.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Thank you so much for being here, for listening. And today we have a really special episode. A friend of mine is here sharing an incredible story about how yoga really helped change his life when he hit rock bottom. There is so much inspiration for all of you to take away from this special episode. Before I introduce him, I just wanted to remind you of the 2 ways that you can support the show. The first way is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. And if you're not sure how to do that, because I know it's confusing, you can go to savannahspirit.com/review, and it'll walk you through step by step. I know I often want to leave reviews for podcasts I love, and it can just be a tricky process to do that. The second way to support the show is to make a purchase on savannahspirit.com. Today I'm featuring their Ganesh candle holder. It's so cute, so pretty, the perfect thing you'd want to have on your altar at home. And remember, Ganesh is the Lord of new beginnings and the remover of obstacles. So you can use that code podcast30 to get the gorgeous candle holder or anything your heart desires at savannahspirit.com. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our guest, Danni Pomplun. He runs his own popular 200-hour teacher training in San Francisco and is the lead teacher for various teacher trainings in both the US and abroad. He's featured in my teacher training online as well. He has over 700 hours of advanced yoga training from teachers like Jason Crandell, Noah Mazet, and Darren Main. He offers continuing education workshops and tune-up retreats where instructors can refine and deepen their skills, one of which we're offering together in 2019 in San Francisco. He's taught at the Sedona Yoga Festival, Ashville Yoga Festival, San Diego Yoga Festival, to name a few, and he leads retreats around the world. Danni, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so excited you're here, and I know you're going to tell us, how did yoga change your life when you hit rock bottom?
I guess I'll start from the beginning. I grew up in Southern California, and the nuts and bolts of it is really broken family. Mom was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and dad was kind of just a little MIA for most of it. And so that led to me growing up, kind of solo. My brothers and sisters were around, but we kind of just had to take care of ourselves. And I left home when I was 16 and kind of just started living life and really just getting through it as best as I could. And things got a little rocky when I was 25. I had already been using drugs and alcohol, and just not really to a point where I was going to injure myself. And I'd lost somebody that I loved, and it just kind of all spiraled from there. I was in so much pain and anger and didn't really understand how to express most of it. And
so you don't sound like the average person who'd walk into a yoga class and in the state you're describing right now. So how did you have any awareness of this practice at that point?
So it was kind of an accident for me. When I was 18, I moved to San Diego, and I moved with this girl who was a yoga practitioner and a teacher, and she had invited me to go to a yoga class, and I was like, a what class? And she was like, yoga. I'm like, yeah, I love yogurt. Yogurt's great. Let's go do this.
You thought she said yogurt?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't know what it was. I was like, okay. And I took a class, and it was an Ashtanga class led, and I remember I couldn't walk 3 days later because I was in so much pain, but I definitely wanted more of it, and plus all my surfing friends were doing it too, so I was like, okay, I gotta go do it.
So were you physical at this point? It sounds like you were surfing,
yeah.
Were you running? I mean, it wasn't like you were,
yeah.
You had no physical practice whatsoever, just
right.
You hadn't done yoga before.
Right, I'd never
/
done...
yogurt.
Yeah, exactly, / yogurt. I was pretty active as it was, and so I kind of dabbled in the practice a little bit, but I didn't really understand it. I knew that it was moving your body into shapes, but that's really all I really understood. And so when I was 25, I basically kind of hit my rock bottom. I had a partner that had passed away, and so I was kind of leading on a really dangerous path, I guess, with my drugs and alcohol. And a roommate of mine at the time was like, I can't see you do this anymore. And I was like, well, what else am I supposed to do? And she's like, well, you've done yoga. That's good for you. There's a new yoga studio that opened up down the street. Do that.
And what were you doing to make a living at the time?
Bartending.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a bartender for 10 years. So I managed bars and nightclubs forever. And yeah, I wanted to keep my living situation, keep my roommate happy, and kind of just figure it out. And so I started going to yoga, and I was such a little snot when I first walked in there. I was so like cocky and like, oh, I'm really athletic and I can do this stuff. But like the practice does, it kind of breaks us down. And I like to remind people that the practice, takes care of our scars. It pulls back the we're not enough and that we're not worthy of, and that, we're not our past stories. And
talk more about that. And what did rock bottom really feel like for you? Because it sounds like it was drugs, alcohol, but also this loss of someone you loved. And I think everyone can relate to that, like losing someone that you love and going through grief as well at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of felt like I had nothing left to live for. I had a failed suicide attempt that happened beforehand, and I was injuring myself with drugs and alcohol, and I just didn't want to feel anymore. I didn't really. Everything hurt so much that I just wanted to escape that. But then it got to the point where I couldn't even escape it because there was nowhere else to go. And yoga really made me not escape it. It made me kind of look at it and make sense of it. Not maybe, it actually really started to, it created a space where I could actually feel safe enough to be able to explore those feelings again without having to run and hide or to, go mask them with some type of like alcohol, some type of substance or whatever it was. And
that of course was later on. I'm imagining at the beginning, you said you're coming to the class and you feel all cocky and, so what did the evolution look like? Like, was there a moment where you suddenly realized like, whoa, this practice is about more than I think it is, or something like that?
Yeah. I think the evolution was I went to go take class and I was like, I'm never doing this again. And the teacher was so kind and she was so nice and pulled me aside after class. And, I get it now as a teacher because you can see when people walk into the room with their baggage, you can just kind of read their energy a little bit. And she saw that and was like, hey, my name's Meg. You should come take my class again tomorrow. I would love to see you again. And she kind of hooked me in again, and she kind of hooked me in again. And for me, it was like, oh, okay, someone's being nice to me. Like, that's really cool. And then they led me through this workshop. They actually were like, we'd love for you to take this workshop on like what it is to be a yogi and so on and so forth. So I got to learn about like the history and the philosophy. And then that kind of led to like more, inquiry. And I took a teacher training. I didn't really want to, but they had pulled away the trade program. They're like, well, if you want free yoga, you have to do the teacher training. And so they were kind of already pushing me. And it wasn't until teacher training where I was like, oh, there's more to this than just that. There's more to this than just moving your body in poses. I started to understand that it was a moving meditation, that it was more than just asana practice.
Mm-hmm. I think that's common. Like, people go into yoga teacher training thinking they just want to like enhance their physical practice, and then it ends up turning into kind of this huge spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. And I think I want to hear more about this, because going from as distraught as it sounds like you were to being like, okay, I'm going to take a teacher training, like how many months was in between those periods of time?
It was like a couple years.
Okay. All right. So we like flash forward quite a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I needed like yoga was the one thing that I had to like do. So when I first started, I was like scrubbing toilets to get free yoga. And then I was like in charge of the toilet scrubbers. And then I was working like the front desk. So I started to like really get into the community and really, be supported by all of these people. And naturally they were like, you need to do this teacher training. And I was like, no. And they were like, do it.
Right.
And one thing led to another.
And then when you finished yoga teacher training, did you start teaching right away, or did it?
I didn't want to teach. I actually was not ready to be a teacher. And I never, it's funny because I laugh about it now. I'm like, if you were to tell me even like 5 years ago that I would be teaching yoga, I would have probably been like, yeah, right, no way. But before the teacher training was even done, I had a friend that worked at a gym who was like, you're going to teach yoga. Like, you're meant to do this. And I was kind of caught up in my own, like, no, I'm not worthy enough for it, whatever. But I auditioned and I went through with it, and they're like, cool, you start on Saturdays, like you're going to be here. And I started teaching. And as soon as I started teaching, I was like, oh, I get it. I'm supposed to do this. Got it. Makes sense now. What
advice do you have for folks who might have a family member or a friend or someone who they see as in distress? Because my guess is if someone's listening to this podcast, they're already committed to this path of yoga, or they're quite serious about it if they're listening. But they might have, like, whether it's a mother, brother, family member, friend, who they see going through a dark time, or they see going through a period of grief. Mm-hmm. What can they say to that person? Like, what is it that people said to you that really helped pull you into this practice as someone who otherwise wouldn't have been interested in it?
I think for me, it was like, it wasn't necessarily what people had said, but just the feeling I got, like seeing these other people that were like, so not necessarily liberated, but they had these tools and these techniques to make life a little bit easier, because yoga is pretty much like life training, I think, in my book. Teacher training is like a life training. It teaches you how to like inquire and become a better person. And that was like a direct like correlation of like, okay, they're onto something. How do I get on that?
And when you were going through all this grief yourself, like, was there a particular practice, like maybe a particular meditation or a particular mantra or something that was sort of an anchor point for you, like during the hardest part of this like dark journey?
I think I was so disconnected. I mean, physically disconnected because, there's so many under so many influences that like I didn't feel connected to myself. And so I started picking up meditation. And as I started picking up meditation, I didn't really know what I was doing. I know I was kind of supposed to be sitting, but I'd start to explore it more. And, when I meditate and even when I practice yoga, which is a moving meditation, like I feel more connected to myself. And when I feel more connected to myself, I feel connected to my family. When I feel more connected to my family, I feel connected to my friends. When I feel connected to my friends, I feel connected to my community. So I started to feel more and more like I belonged and that my life was actually worthy and I had a place. But really, it was the meditation that, and even still to this day, it just brings me a step back. It kind of sets me, for me, like out of my body, and I can just observe everything that's going on, like the reactions, the breath, not trying to shift anything, not trying to manipulate it or change it, but just take a step back and look at it and really see like, oh, what's making sense? What's not making sense? What's real and what's just my brain going off into like a million different directions.
One of my favorite topics is how so often the yoga we start with is not necessarily the yoga we need. And like the practice that we really love kind of changes over the years, right? So probably the yoga that you were most attracted to in that darkest hour, I'm guessing is maybe different from what you're practicing right now. Can you talk listeners through sort of what that progression is like, keeping in mind that we're looking at this from the context, how can each of us as individuals like evolve our practice?
Right. I think my teacher says it best, like yoga is a marathon. It's not a quick sprint. And when I first started, I started hot yoga. It was like hot, sweaty power vinyasa. The room would be like...
Me too.
The room would be like 95 degrees and humidity on. And that's what I needed. I needed someone to kick my butt to like, pretty much just get me to the point where I was tired so that I can actually just sit and rest, and not have to think.
And I also think people are attracted to that style initially too, because it is a little like masochistic, because we're so hard on ourselves and we think if we're not working or killing ourselves in a workout, there's no point.
Right. Yeah, same. Yeah. And it wasn't until after like I took a workshop that was like outside of like that studio that I was like, oh, there's something different, and I could learn more about mantra and about chanting and like, connecting to the energetic body and subtle body things. And it was just kind of like, it was a whole new world, when I like stepped outside of that box. I started to explore way more tools and techniques. And now it's like, I was the guy that was like power yoga all the time and tons of, would do extra push-ups and chaturanga inside yoga. And now I'm buying a harmonium and I want to just chant and do like 3 poses and that's it.
And where along the line in this spectrum did the drugs and alcohol really completely fall off? Like, was it, it wasn't like you attended one yoga class and it was like, okay, I'm sober. Like, what were you doing in conjunction for the grief, for the addiction, as you were moving through this process?
I think yoga really gave me the platform to, one, I'd never heard the words like compassion before in my life. And so as I started to learn more about that and the yamas and the niyamas, I was like, I got to do some more self-care. And that like gave me the strength and the courage to like go seek therapy and, to go seek outside help and really just kind of like question those relationships that I had in my life with those things. And it wasn't until, maybe about 4 years ago now where I took a little break off drinking and was like, how is this affecting my life in a good way or a bad way? Is this making my life better or is it making my life worse? So I took a little break and then I revisited it and I was like, what was better, like without or with? And I just decided it was like best without. But it wasn't until, I started thriving and living a really healthy lifestyle. Like even my diet changed and everything where I was like, this stuff just doesn't feel good in my body anymore.
So it wasn't a cold turkey moment. I just wanted to make sure to clarify that for people. It was like a phasing out of...
Yes and no. I like made a decision where I was going to like phase things out. And then I went like right back into it. Like in a split second, I was like, okay, I said like 1 year, like I'm going to go back and try it out. And then I tried it out for like 9 months. And then I woke up one day and was like, that's not working.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you really like let yourself make your own decision. You're like, we're going to do this for 9 months and then we're going to do this for
a little bit,
and then we're going to decide.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. So listening to your story, it sounds like that one yoga teacher who really asked you to come back. I think you even remembered her name, Meg.
We're still really good friends.
Good. Well, it sounds like that was huge, especially for someone who's like on the brink or has contemplated suicide in the past. How has that led into the teaching you're doing now? And can you tell us a little bit about, because I know you, so your teaching style is very much like so getting to know each individual student and learning their names. And is that kind of coming back to when you felt really seen by her?
That's exactly what it is. It's making people feel like they're people. Like I think the worst thing we can ever do to somebody is make them feel like they don't exist. And so while I'm holding that space for students, like I'm all there for them, and I want them to know that, and I really show up for them as individuals, but also as like a community and as a Sangha. I try to be there. But I open up in the right context, conversation for like, how do we hold trauma? I share a lot in my class about like what I'm going through personally, not to dump, but to as a Dharma talk, I had this really bummer experience with my friend, and, I noticed I felt sadness, and like, how do we feel when we feel sadness, and what do we do, and how can we work that through our bodies? And so I try to theme that into my classes as well.
So tell us a little bit more about how you're teaching yoga now, and how has it evolved over the years? And I mean, you just mentioned like Dharma talk, like how are you creating classes? What themes are you most interested in? Where do you see all of this kind of going? Oh my gosh.
I used to make fun of chanting. I used to be like, it's not for me. And like, how's it evolving? Like, I bought a harmonium, which is a big deal. I've naturally have slowed down a lot because I figured, one, it feels better in my body, but two, like the more space I have to slow down, the more time I actually have for the teachings to settle in for students, but also the more themes I get to weave in. The more we're holding postures and kind of being somewhere, whether it's discomfort or comfortable, I can speak more to that and what's happening. And I think the themes that I'm like weaving into and really into in life is just people stepping into their greatness. Like, I feel like for me, my Dharma is to remind people how awesome they are and how they have this big light in front of them, it's inside of them. And I think we just forget that it's there, and we just, need someone to really point us back in that direction. Everyone is so special, and everyone is so worthy, and everyone deserves to be here. And I think sometimes they just need that little tap on the shoulder to be like, oh yeah.
So you've used this word Dharma a couple times now, and I know some of the Savannah listeners will know what that means, but some of them might not. So can you define that word and kind of how it's affected how you look at this practice personally?
Yeah, it's it's the way I take it is like your purpose and like what your action for this life is supposed to be. And there's Dharma on many different things, like the lessons and wisdom. A big part of like my Dharma talks is just like, we call it wisdom, but things that I've learned in my life in hopes that someone can learn from that as well, if it makes sense, if it resonates with somebody.
So it's kind of like your life purpose.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So what advice do you have for students or listeners who feel so disconnected from that? Like they don't know what their purpose is, or as very common in this era, in the Vata era that we live in, they feel pulled in like a million different directions. They're like, I think my purpose might be this, but it might be some other thing.
Right.
What advice do you have for them?
Sit down and figure out your why, and like just ask yourself why you're here, and like what thrills you, and what really supports you, what makes you feel full, what makes you feel like you want to be there, what makes you feel like you want to be there tenfold. Like figuring out the why is really important. That's like it's your juice, it gets you going.
And I've been lucky enough to teach with you and interview you before. So I know how much you talk about this, like the finding your why. And I mean, a lot of the Savannah listeners might be teachers too. So I really want you to like crystallize this for us, unpack this for us. What does finding your why really mean? How does someone go about doing that? And what is your why?
Yeah, I think, the process is so hard, and it doesn't, I don't think there's like a one-way recipe for everyone to figure out I wish I could, that's my next business tool, actually. I'm gonna invent that, how to figure out your why. I think it's just really digging deep down within yourself and figure out what is really fueling you. And for me, like, I knew I was teaching, but I didn't know why I was teaching. And it took so long to figure out why I was teaching, and it was because I feel like my why is community. Like, I love bringing people together. I love creating community types of adventures. I love bringing people from all corners of the world into one place and letting them thrive with one another. Like bringing people together, which I think we need a lot more of the world in general. Like that to me is important. It makes me, when at the end of a show and everyone gets up and claps and you're just like, yeah, like more of that in life. We need way more of that.
Yes, I love that. And for someone who's trying to get to that answer themselves, I mean, did you come to that through a lot of introspection, or just from getting into action and teaching more and more? Or I mean, how did you get so clear? Because I think one of the things that's really powerful about your teaching, as someone who's been lucky enough to take your classes, and hopefully other people can connect and find with you, especially since you're traveling, doing a lot more retreats and festival work. But it is so clear, your passion and just the way you speak, that why, that purpose is so clear. How can other people like get that or get in touch with that, whether they're yoga teachers or not?
Yeah, I think it's important to get out of your head. So, taking a step back out of your head and out of your thoughts and trying to figure it out overnight is not going to happen. And I think stopping and slowing down and hitting pause, I think we want that quick recipe to how do I figure out my why tomorrow, and really sitting back and seeing what resonates with you. So that if that's meditation, if that's journaling, but it is totally introspective, like really coming down to the root of what fuels you, like what gets you out of bed, what makes you, and that normally translates into all areas of your life, your friendships, your work life, your romantic life, whatever it is, the way that you interact with the world. I think your why has a big purpose to do with that.
So you've mentioned slowing down and getting introspective a couple times throughout this episode. So I'm wondering, can you give us some concrete examples? What does that look like in your own life? Does it mean like checking social media a little bit less? Does it mean like bubble bath? Does it mean, you mentioned journaling, which I'm super passionate about. What does it look like for you?
All the same. all in
including
one,
the bubble bath.
Yeah, including the bubble bath. Yeah. Like one thing I do in the mornings is I don't do social media for the first hour. So I hit my alarm, I turn it off, and I get my gratitude journal out, and I write my mantra for the day, and then I write like 10 things I'm grateful for. And it could be something simple like my beating heart, or like, I don't know, this meal that I had yesterday or whatever. And then from there, I just kind of go like through my morning quiet routine. Like, I'll have my tea, I'll make my eggs and my breakfast and whatever it is that I'm, doing, and kind of just sit back and reflect. A ton of journaling. I know you're super passionate about journaling. I've seen your planner. It's like super awesome. The journal. It's really rad. But I think like being able to like, it's nice to have thoughts. That's great. But to be able to like conceptualize something down in paper and to reflect on that and to look at it makes it a little more tangible. That a lot of meditation. So
it sounds like you have sort of a morning sadhana or practice ritual that you're doing every day. Mm-hmm. How important do you think that is? Because I know a lot of people, it's like, well, you need to, it's funny because even in my own teaching, it's like, well, you need to make the practice fit your lifestyle. So just fit it in where you can. Yeah. On the other hand, I know for me, like having the discipline of, nope, it's happening every morning, no matter what, that structure is important. How do you see like this interplay of structure and freedom playing out in your own personal practice? Because it's hard as a teacher too. Yeah. Your classes are very physical. So I'm imagining your personal practice, you might be tired a lot of the time. Like I see how much energy you output when you're teaching. So.
I think it's all, it's just all about like, you're saying like, how do you, like, you got to fit it into your lifestyle. Like, well then for me, my lifestyle is yoga. So everything else has to fit into it, and I made that conscious decision to do that. Like what's more important, sleeping in for half an hour in the morning or, sitting down and journaling and sitting and meditating? What's more important, watching Netflix for 2 hours, or sitting down and writing my gratitude journal? What's more important, falling down a YouTube, hole where you're like, what's this? What's that? What's that? And 2 hours later, you're like, I should have been in bed, or sitting down. There's small things that we can just cut out, like small little things. And I always say 10% shifts. You don't have to do like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to take an hour off social media and then I'm going to start my tea and then I'm going to do this. Like just start with like maybe tomorrow for 10 minutes in the morning. If you're used to checking your phone, you don't. And then the day after that, maybe add 12 minutes. And then the week after that, maybe you do 20 minutes. And then, and if you go back a little bit, cool, but like integrate it very slowly. If you try to like conquer it overnight, it's not going to happen.
Right. And a tip you said that I think I want to really make clear for people, and I know this has been huge for me, is that the success of your practice is actually set up the day before, right? So like if you don't get in bed on time and you're someone who has a morning sadhana, you're kicking yourself. So it's really, it's like, and especially having a newborn now, because it's like if his first nap isn't good, then the second nap, like the whole day builds on itself. Right. And it's the same for us as adults, like if you're not in bed by 10 p.m., you're not going to be able to do the practice that you want to do in the morning to be able to really show up, if that's something you're cultivating. And so your morning practice, you mentioned tea, which I love. You mentioned some quiet time. What does the physical asana practice look like for you, especially as someone who's a teacher and giving a lot? Are you doing a pretty physical practice in the mornings, or is it much more about kind of receiving, resting, meditation?
Receiving, resting, and meditation, like definitely for me in the mornings. And then I do an actual physical practice later on in the afternoons when I'm a little more like jazzed and ready to go for it. But definitely like the morning for me is like recharge, get ready to prepare and plan, and like more internal, knowing that you're about to go give a bunch of work and a bunch of light, And so I think like really just starting to center yourself so that you can like walk out into the world ready.
Amazing. What final tips do you have that you want to share with Savannah listeners, whether it's something about overcoming grief and sadness or something about teaching and finding your purpose?
I think just figuring out your why. That's the biggest thing, is just sit down and journal and pull out, whatever it is that you need to just start to figure out what's fueling you. Even just start with what's fueling you today.
And an exercise that a coach did with me a couple years back, and I'm curious if you think this is a good idea, but I'll share it with the listeners just in case they're interested in this, is that he had me write out, I think, what I wanted, and then I had to journal under that and say why. And then I had to journal again. So it would be like, well, I want, this type of house, or, this type of husband, or, whatever it is. And I was like, okay, why? And so then it's like, because that would make me feel safe, and that would make me feel happy, and because it's what I want. And then it's like, okay, why? Yeah. and you just keep journaling. And it was a very cool exercise when he made me do it, because I think he made me even do it live with him. I was like rolling my eyes and I was like, ugh, you know, like wanted to slam my head against the door. But looking back, I think if you're someone who's excited about what Danny's sharing here and you're like, oh, I really want to get in touch with that journaling exercise could be a good first step for you to just start trying to get deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I agree. I love that exercise. I'm stealing it.
Awesome. Do it. Share it. All right, perfect. Danny, thank you so much for coming on the show. Savannah listeners, let me know. Did you have fun? Did you enjoy this week's episode? Are you inspired? I would love to hear from you in our private Facebook group. savannahspirit.com/group is what's going to redirect you, and then you can get approved and be a member. I always want to hear your feedback for new episodes, so definitely make sure to reach out. And I'm sending you so much love from Danny's hearts and mine. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.